Hello friends! Continuing with the instructional videos about the LS brand M100 inverter. Today, we want to talk about one of the great features of the M100 inverter. The feature we're going to learn about today is the holding analog function. What does this feature do? If you set your frequency reference in the M100 inverter through the analog voltage inputs, whether it's a potentiometer on the keypad or an external 0 to 10 volt signal. If there's noise in the system and due to this noise, your analog voltage input signal changes. Based on this noise, you can, by simply enabling the advanced analog holding feature and utilizing one of the available digital inputs, you can effectively stabilize the specific frequency value you desire. Once you lock it in, the power inverter will then continuously and reliably operate at that exact set frequency for your application. But how does it work? If you set the FRQ parameter, which is the frequency reference in the M100 inverter, to options 2 or 3, each of these determines the frequency reference either through the analog voltage input using the potentiometer on the keypad, and if you set it to option 3, it will use the external analog voltage input from 0 to 10 volts. If your parameter is set to these options, you can use one of your digital inputs to... Now from these, 65 corresponds to P1 up to 69, which is P5, set to value 23. Set it to hold analog. If you select this option, the corresponding digital input, once it is activated, noise on your analog input will no longer have any effect. The increase or decrease of this value, whether from 0 to 5 volts or 0 to 10 volts, it will no longer have any effect on the frequency value you have set for the music. No effect at all. Alright, so those were the settings. Therefore, our frequency must definitely be either on option 2, the volume on the keypad, or option 3, through a 0 to 10 volt analog input signal to the inverter. Okay, so those were the settings, but what we want to do in this instructional example in this educational video is that we want to set our frequency reference FRQ to option 3, meaning through a 0 to 10 volt signal, and connect the terminals to V1 and CM using this voltage module and a 0 to 1 switch. As we mentioned, from pin 65 to 69 corresponds to P1 to P5 on option 1. For the analog input, we want to define this 0 and 1 switch. To the digital input, so we want to set in 67 to number 23. If we set it to 23, this digital input, which is P3 on option 1, is set to analog hold. I want to adjust the frequency value with this. When this 0 and 1 switch is activated, the increase and decrease of the voltage value from 0 to 10 volts will affect the frequency value. It won't have any effect, and my frequency value won't change and will remain constant. Let's go. Let's apply the settings we've learned on this inverter and test this feature together. So as we said, to activate the analog hold feature, first we need to set the corresponding digital input to analog hold. We have selected the PC terminal. We enter the parameter group IN67, which is related to the PC digital input, and we set it to number 23. So our PC digital input terminal has been defined as analog hold. Now, as we said, our FRQ, our frequency reference, must either be set to 2, which corresponds to this potentiometer on the inverter keypad, or it should be set to 3, which we can use this analog voltage input from 0 to 10 volts to supply voltage to the inverter and change our frequency. We set it to number 3, meaning the analog voltage input from 0 to 10 volts. I have connected this module to the V1 and CM terminals of the inverter, the terminals related to the analog voltage input. Okay, now I'm going to start my inverter. You can clearly see that by manually changing the voltage value from 0 up to 10 volts, my output frequency gradually changes. Now if I proceed to activate the specific digital input related to the analog hold function, by changing the analog input value to the inverter, you can see that the frequency doesn't change at all. It doesn't, right? Meaning even if there's noise in your network and it changes the analog input value because of that, If this digital input terminal is active, no change will occur in your frequency. You can see that by changing it, my frequency remains constant. Now I'll deactivate it again. It does. You see, after it was deactivated, when I changed the value and voltage again, the inverter frequency changes, right? So in this instructional video, we also got familiar with the analog hold feature of the inverter